let's get into it. So 3 things I'm going to talk through. The first is altcoin speculation. The second is home birth. And the third is the concept of approaching life with kindness, ease, and grace. So to take the first one, altcoin speculation. What do I mean by that? Well, first of all, an altcoin is, in my mind at least, a crypto token that is not Bitcoin. So some kind of cryptographically designed digital asset that you can buy and sell through an exchange. You could potentially self-custody it in your own wallet. And it is in some ways a product of the free market, in that I totally and utterly believe that people should be allowed to do what they want with their money when they want. And this idea, for example, of like, you have to be a high net wealth individual from our perspective, some arbitrary amount of money by your name to access certain types of investment. That to me is crazy. Absolutely everyone should be able to choose what they want with their money. But here's where this gets interesting, is that altcoins, it's a very, very big difference between Bitcoin and altcoins. And it gets basked in, it gets bundled into this thing called crypto. And often people say to me, oh, Jake, how's the crypto going? And as soon as they say that, I know they haven't understood that Bitcoin's this thing that's different to the rest. And to briefly dwell on like why that's the case. Well, first of all, to make a comparison, let's say you wanted to make an investment in a public market equity. So you could look at different companies that are traded through different exchanges, figure out, you want to go and buy one. Now, what do you buy? You're buying an equity. There's obviously a lot of regulation and legal precedent as to like what an equity actually is. And the idea of security is very well documented in commercial law. And there's something called the Howey test. It's a very interesting process. Like, how do you look at something and can you decide if it's a security or not? And there's an ongoing debate whether a crypto token like Ethereum is actually a security, and therefore is it dealt with in the appropriate regulatory manner. I don't want to go into that right now. The point being is that a publicly traded equity, yes, it's an equity, but is it an airline? Is it a mining company? Is it a fashion label? How much debt do they have? What's the price to earnings ratio? There's basically there's multiple different tiers of sophistication that you can have to analyze what these equities are. And yes, they might be bundled under the same name, an equity, but they're not the same thing. And you're buying something completely different. And that's just a public market equity. Then you can have private equity, whether it's super early stage angel investment or it's some kind of private equity fund. Even I would describe something like real estate as private equity. It's an individually owned asset. I'm basically trying to explain, like, it may be called an equity, but it's very different under the hood. And the same applies with crypto. It's like, okay, well, so how's Bitcoin different to crypto? Things like, for example, there's no founder. There's no insider team like the Ethereum Foundation that did a pre-mine and raised funds, sold themselves tokens on the cheap before releasing them on the public market. A more recent example of that is the Trump meme coin. 80% of the Trump coins are still held by insiders. And there's all these things called tokenomics where they are supposedly linked to the project for a sustained period of time, and their lockup is for 3 months or 3 years or whatever the case might be. It's kind of like fabricated scarcity. It's kind of like a management buyout clause when you see companies being sold and the founders have to stay working there for a period of time. All this goes to say that the difference between Bitcoin and crypto is an incredibly important thing to figure out. And it's as simple as this. Like, in my mind, Bitcoin is the future of money. It's the base layer that all digital transaction will be done from. Crypto is a collection of highly speculative software projects. And that's where the word speculation comes into this discussion. Before going down that line, some really critical points to hammer home with Bitcoin. Bitcoin's like key innovation is something that's so deep in the weeds of computer science. Like, of course, it's not something the average person knows about. It's something I didn't know about till I learned about it. And it's called the Byzantine generals problem. Imagine you've got 8 armies surrounding a city. Each army is operated by an individual general. If you take the city alone, of course, the returns are higher, but the risk is also higher. If all 8 armies combine together to take the city at the same time, then the chance of winning increases, but the returns are, you don't get to sack the city on your own. And what Satoshi Nakamoto managed to do by utilizing proof of work, which was a piece of technology built originally by Adam Back and Hashcash as a way to avoid spam on email, he solved the Byzantine generals problem. So with decentralized consensus of software, and that's why you now have nodes, you have miners, and it's just the most extraordinary innovation that is constantly testing me in new ways. Where I'm like, oh, I didn't think about it like that before. And I encourage everyone, like, keep digging down this hole. It's absolutely fascinating. Anyway, Bitcoin hasn't changed in the way it was designed since it was launched in 2009. And it's very, very important. So the fixed cap of 21 million hasn't changed. And it's a system in which the rules don't change. So it doesn't matter how much Bitcoin you own, you can't change the rules. And this is absolutely key because the rest of the crypto market, they're changing the rules all the time. And they might decide to print more tokens. They might decide to get rid of some tokens. They might decide to make it more decentralized, less decentralized, faster, slower, cheaper, whatever the case might be. When altcoins are like just sprinkled right in front of your attention as you log into these large crypto exchanges, and then you've got the unit bias. So, oh, well, I've got to pay 100 grand for one Bitcoin. Why don't I pay $1 for this thing over here, and maybe it'll do the same thing? And it's degenerate gambling. It is, honestly, that's what it is. Why do I bring this up, and why do I want to rant about it? Well, as I said already, I don't care what you do with your money, and that's exactly how it should be. But what's important to understand is that there are people out there that know that you don't know what you're doing with your money, and they're capitalizing on that. And it's difficult to see in some ways, but it does get quite nefarious in that anyone can spin up a software protocol. Anyone can do some kind of pre-mine where they sell tokens to a bunch of insiders on the cheap. They use that capital to then fund a good bit of marketing on a B2C basis, and suddenly you've got a Telegram group full of supposed people, but they might all be on the pay with early tokens, and they pump the price, and then retail comes in as this exit liquidity, and you're like, so they are literally just pump and dump schemes, and absolutely a lot of them are. So the way that I look at this, it's like, unless you've got your head around Bitcoin, don't even bother looking at the rest of crypto. And there's many people I've met in the Bitcoin space that are now full-time in Bitcoin, but used to be in crypto. They're really interesting too. I myself, I bought some crypto tokens. I was part of an ICO that completely, like, my money just disappeared, right? I didn't know what I was doing. And that's part of the process. You have to pay the tuition fees en route to figuring out that, it's really this Bitcoin thing I should be paying attention to. But from a kind of purely investment perspective, like, speculating on things is okay. And I want to bring into the story a guy called Luke Belmar. Now, shout out to Luke. We've never met. I've consumed a bunch of his content. Mark Moss is a big proponent of his work, and there's a few things that caught my attention. But first of all, he talks very succinctly about, first you've got to create wealth, then you've got to grow wealth, and then you want to protect wealth. And he's got this organization called Capital Club, and he's managed to grow it to something like 200,000 paying members globally. He's closed the application window from, as far as I can tell. It's been a content-led growth. So really cool how to use content to, like, drive attention to then, end up with paying subscribers for something. And I got an email from him today talking about how, like, he was so fed up with being the exit liquidity for, pump and dump schemes in crypto, and he wanted to, like, get himself an edge. And that's why he decided to kind of create the Capital Club. If I was going to build a pump and dump group, it would look quite a lot like Capital Club. It's like, okay, you've got a bunch of paying members that want to see the inside scoop on the next token that's going to go and rocket to whatever. And if you can time the entry and exit of that token, then sure, you can definitely trade that market very effectively and scoop value out. But my bet is they're all buying Bitcoin with that value. My other bet is it's not a bet per se, it's just observation, or this is actually speculation on my behalf. But if I was a token founder, I'd be going to someone like Luke Belmar and saying, look, you can have the inside scoop on this particular coin that I'm about to launch, market it to your buddies, and let's see where we go. Now, where this gets a bit tricky is I touched on the Howey test earlier. Now, again, this is kind of confronting in a sense as well, because of the idea of like believing in free markets. Like, why is there a regulator? Why is there someone telling you can't buy that company, or you can't buy this company, or you can't buy this debt? The bond market's absolutely massive as well, right? Without getting too bogged down, I look at the crypto market now as something that's absolutely possible to speculate on. But I ask the question to anyone that's doing it, why? And the reason is like, oh, look, I can make a quick buck. Fair enough. And actually, there are people out there that trade interest rate swaps. There are people out there that trade, FX in lots of different locations on lots of different markets. There are people out there that trade classic cars. There are people out there that trade art. There are people out there that trade real estate. Like, people are making their margin somewhere because they're managing to arbitrage the information they have against someone else. But in some ways, they're all playing the same game, but they're basically just someone else is the exit liquidity. Haha, yoke's on you. And they get their money out. And it's kind of depressing in many ways. And you could equally argue this with the status quo financial system. It's like, okay, so let's say I'm a startup business that gets funded by Y Combinator. Okay, super successful, very famous, US-based early stage equity investor. They've got fingers in tons of different pies. Before you know it, the main VCs in Silicon Valley have jumped on the bandwagon. They pump the price of the equity over 2 or 3 rounds to like a Series C. The business may not be profitable. It's just all about growth, user growth, whatever metrics they inflate. Then, Chamath came out with these SPAC things, which are basically like a pre-IPO fund that was buying businesses that couldn't quite make it to IPO, and then actually go and list the company based on a whole bunch of like potentially phony data. Who knows? And the exit liquidity is retail, right? The retail market's now allowed to get involved in this, and you don't have to be regulated to buy these stocks. So in some ways, what happens in the altcoin speculation space is precisely what's been happening in other places. But again, to highlight, the way that an equity is actually a legal document is very different to a crypto token. And the amount of due diligence that's done on a crypto token to be listed on a crypto exchange is nothing like the amount of due diligence that's required to be done to list a company on a stock exchange, or equally for an angel syndicate to make an early stage equity investment. Because of my experience investing in lots of different things, I've been able to understand the different depths of due diligence that gets done. And there's just a number of red flags with the entire crypto space. And that's kind of depressing in a way, because it's very, I like free markets. Okay, cool. Look, by all means, try and raise money for this thing. By all means, try and improve on Bitcoin in some way. But like, what for? And if it is as nefarious as like, because I can make a ton of money off people that don't know what they're buying, that's going to come and bite you in the ass at some point, isn't it? You can speculate on whatever you want. You should be able to buy whatever you want. But in my mind, at least, I feel so grateful to have come to a point where I've really studied Bitcoin very deeply. And this is a different beast altogether. And you have to ask the question, what is money? And only through asking that question can you see, A, Bitcoin is just money, but B, all these other things are actually really poor forms of money. And so in some ways, there's an extremely strong ethical argument for Bitcoin being the best asset allocation you can make. Luke Belmar, go for it. Everyone that's part of Capital Club, go for it. I wish you the very best of luck. I'm sitting in a position where I'm not a member of the club, so I'm only kind of speculating from the outside. First of all, figure out Bitcoin. And then, with 10% of your investable assets, at most, start thinking about how can you beat Bitcoin? Okay, well, you might be able to beat Bitcoin by speculating in altcoins. You also might be able to beat Bitcoin by speculating on some very niche art, for example. Like, who knows? And that would be all about like, where do you have an edge? And to Luke's point, that's fair enough. He's like, okay, I think I can create an edge in this crypto thing, and I can then sell that edge to other people, and I can also benefit from it myself. But yes, just handle with care, ladies and gents. Handle with care. Okay, so number 2, the idea of a home birth. I am now the proud father of 3, and I am now proud to say that I've witnessed 3 home births. So shout out to my amazing wife, Lauren, for birthing our children. And I did my mini meditation. I was thinking about what am I going to do for my solo episode, and it just came through really strong. It's like home birth. It's like, okay. So what's interesting to me to share about that? Well, it's insanely niche. And again, forgive me, I haven't got specific data to point here, but the amount of Australian kids that are born at home is absolutely minuscule as a percentage. And what's interesting is when you dig into the additional data around this, you have to ask why. And so there was a lady called Rhea Dempsey. She's got some great books. Oz has read them, and we did a course of hers. And she's a doula. And we did a course in Melbourne. And that was actually before my second daughter was born and after the first. So we'd already done one home birth when we went to her workshop. But she showed us lots of data that explains how home birth is as safe as, if not safer, than a hospital birth. And I would just like to share some of the reasons why that really makes sense to me and some of the benefits of exploring this. So anyone out there that's thinking of having a family or about to have another child, like definitely look at this. The reason we started getting into it was because, Ruby was born July 2020. So COVID was kind of going off all over the place. Those earliest phases, we just didn't know what the hell was going on. And slowly but surely, the veil kind of fell. But in Melbourne, at least, it was like, the partner's not allowed in the hospital for, to be part of the birth. And then it was like, but the partner is now. And then the partner isn't. And it wasn't clear. And so what was very obvious to us was actually we're out of control, by being in this environment that is the hospital. Like, we don't know what we're going to get told and what might happen. What other options are there? And it turned out there's a community of private midwives that you can pay who come to your house. And we ended up having a bunch of appointments with some midwives, decided on a team. And it's basically just then a waiting game. And so I think Ruby was born 10 or 12 days past the due date at home, mammoth labor. There was a point where we actually thought, oh my God, Loz is so tired. This baby's not coming out. The baby was the wrong way around, and it transpired she had a huge amount of urine still knocking around, and it made it really difficult to give birth. And I left the room, and the lead midwife left the room, and I was like, shit, I haven't packed the hospital bag. My one job. It's like we'd done something called shared care, so we knew that we were going to have a home birth, but if something was to go wrong, there was a obstetrician on call that could meet us in a hospital nearby. And so it was like the decision was made, okay, we've got to go to hospital. We've been doing this for too long. It's like labor started at, let's say, midnight on a Friday night, and we were still going 2-3 o'clock in the afternoon on a Saturday. I left the bedroom. The lead midwife left the bedroom. I'm like frantically running around trying to get the dog to take a pee on the verge outside, trying to pack all the essential things that I was supposed to have packed in the hospital bag days before. And this amazing thing happened where, and in hindsight, we think that perhaps Lauren's connection with the lead midwife wasn't strong enough, and she didn't trust her. She didn't completely give up to her. But midwife number 2 stepped in, and something shifted, and Loz then went into the latter part of her labor, in which you just completely lose control, and your body just takes over. It's unbelievable to watch. And my daughter was born at home about 5 p.m. Saturday. And before you know it, we just had a small baby in her arms at home. I ordered a pizza and a bottle of wine, and it was just the most beautiful experience in that we were completely cocooned in our own little nest, and we loved it. And so as soon as we'd gone through that experience and you'd done it once, we're definitely doing it again. And some of the things that resonate strongly from what we learn is Rhea teaches this concept of the cascade of interventions. So why is it that so many Australian kids born in hospital are born with unelected cesareans? And she argues it's pretty simple. Labor is extraordinarily painful. And when the pain is that high, and Loz openly admits this, she was at home, so there was not the same access to drugs as there is in a hospital. Whereas in a hospital, they're like, oh, hi, Mum, are you feeling okay? Would you like some drugs? Like, give me the fucking drugs. And before you know it, there's an epidural. And then it's like, God, we've got to get the tongs out and pull this baby out. And there's basically all these different things that are supposed to help with the childbirth. But really, they are interventions. And before you know it, the baby, because they're constantly monitoring the baby's heartbeat, when the heartbeat becomes too fast and irregular, it's like, oh my God, the baby's struggling, we've got to get it out. Boom, C-section. And it's so scary how many women and the fathers that are there too have these extraordinarily traumatic labor experiences in modern hospitals. And it's due to, as she quite rightly says, this cascade of interventions. And so when you're at home, there's nothing to like take the pain away. You got to roll with it. You got to let nature take its course. And to some extent, you're kind of rolling the dice. But the medical system, it kind of I'm going to say it sells fear, but that's not quite right. It promotes fear and sells solutions to that. It's like, oh, it's unsafe to give birth at home. And Rhea's like, no, it's not. Look at all this information. It's clear. It shows it's not. And we've had 3 kids at home. It's absolutely not unsafe. It's a beautiful experience. And then she gave these comparisons about like, just look at other mammals. A cat, female cat will take itself off, hide under a bench somewhere, pitch black, middle of the night, and have 8 kittens. And it's kind of similar with female human beings, where it's like, make it nice and dark, nice and safe, their own space, and just kind of let them get on with it, right? You don't need to be the guy like hugging on her the whole time. Oh, well done, Dan. It's just get the fuck out of the way, and it will figure itself out. And when you go to a hospital, first of all, you've had to leave your home, and you're like, has my waters broken? Has the labor actually started? Where are the contractions? How dilated am I? You've had to get in a car to somehow travel to a hospital, and then the midwife you were previously dealing with isn't actually there. And so you now got this new random person. You've got all these bright lights everywhere. You've been scuttled into this room that you've never seen before. And it's just so obvious to me that you're a number on a piece of paper and they need that bed for the next person. It's all just this big kind of machine. And that's not to say that you can't or you shouldn't, go for the option of hospital. If that feels right to you, go for it. But what I'm trying to, I guess, explain through telling these stories is there are other options, and we've got huge benefit out of them. I was inspired to talk about that because I finished an episode recently with a friend who told me that they were due, number 1 was due, and I started prattling on about home births and whatever, and they were like, yeah, we're going to go for it too. So I highly recommend that. And in particular, the dads out there, yes, your wife needs to be fully the one that makes this decision. But don't be the guy that's like, oh, I'm too scared if you do it in a hospital. Like, go and do the work. Read Rhea Dempsey's book. Find out why home birth is or isn't the right option, and do something about it. And I feel very strongly that if you can have anything like the experiences that we've managed to have, it's a beautiful start to the life of a family. Nice. And so that will then take me to my final subject, kindness, ease, and grace. This week I had on the pod Jason Parks. So shout out to Jason. And Jason's been mentoring me for the last maybe 3 or 4 months. And as an expert in the field of energy, he's been unbelievably insightful on different tips, tricks, strategies. He talks about universal law. So maybe law, literally laws that you should live your life by. And one of the phrases that he talks about a lot is living life with kindness, ease, and grace. And what he's taught me is that really that's how everything should be. And so when you're going through day-to-day life, if something's really hard, well, maybe it's because you shouldn't be doing it. Or if something trips you up and triggers you, so why is that? And I guess this is more just to open the conversation. Like, reach out to me if you've got questions about this, or if you'd like to get in touch with Jason, I highly recommend it, because it's kind of like you're playing around with the operating system that is your mind, and you're able to upgrade the software system with different thought processes. And you can almost become observational. And so when you're doing something and you get into an absolute flap about it, you're like, oh, this is a fucking nightmare. Kind of like when I take one of this solo episode earlier today, I'm like, oh, okay, the baby's asleep. The missus has got the other kids. I think I've got some time here. All right, I'm going to just go for it, see what happens. And I'm riffing away, talking about crypto speculation, and then boom, the phone rings. And then the baby starts crying. an expectation is set that hasn't been met, and before you know it, you're angry and you're pissed off with everyone. It's like, well, that's just not kindness, ease, and grace. And so it wasn't the right time, and it wasn't meant to be. And so I think what I'm learning is it's easier just to let it go. And so as an investor, it's like, okay, well, some due diligence processes on deciding what to invest into, they just happen really easily. Maybe there's something in that, it's like, well, why is the friction there? And is the person you're negotiating with coming at this from a headspace of kindness, ease, and grace? And more often than not, they're not, right? People haven't done the emotional work. They haven't looked into energetics. They are sadly poisoned by the modern phenomenon of fiat currency and inflation. And more often than not, people are struggling to keep their head above water. Everything's getting more expensive. Life's getting harder. You can't go on holiday. It's not kindness, ease, and grace. And so using these things, we can, I believe, start to radically improve our day-to-day life by purely just thinking differently and recognizing things. Go, or maybe that's not the way to go. Well, that's not the right direction. And obviously, it's very important not to get too caught up in this idea of just like manifesting anything, because I also don't think that's possible. But safe to say, I'm really toying with these concepts, playing around with them, trying to see things in a different way. And it's just been very, very interesting. I'm going to leave that there. I really hope that these solo episodes are useful. Just let me know, basically. Give us a shout. Send me an email, hi@jakewoodhouse.io. Why is this useful? Why is this not useful? Did any of it resonate? And start a conversation, because extraordinarily, all this content that's like constantly hitting the digital world every single day, there's not enough high quality, real conversation for some reason. And that's really what I would like this podcast to be all about. So thank you so much for your time. And I'm going to try and approach the rest of my days with kindness, ease, and grace. Thank you.